kids, welcome back to my channel. My name's Lizzie and we're reading chapters 4 through 6 in our Nancy Drew Clue Crew, the Valentine's Day Secret. I forgot what it was called. Alright, are you ready? If you need a few minutes to get a drink or a snack, pause it. We're starting the first chapter at 22 seconds in. Alright, chapter 4, Moo Shoe. But Miss Ramirez, Henderson started to say, everybody likes pizza. It was a compliment. Henderson, Miss Ramirez interrupted, writing mean Valentines like that is inappropriate. As Miss Ramirez continued to lecture Henderson, Nancy turned to George. Henderson was at Barnyard Buddies yesterday, Nancy whispered. If he wrote those nasty cards, maybe he wrote yours too. Miss Ramirez told the class to take their seats. Instead of heading for their desks, Nancy and George headed straight to Henderson. What do you want? Henderson said as he chomped on a piece of gum. I'm in enough trouble already. Nancy pulled the nasty Valentine from her backpack. She held it up in front of Henderson's face. George found this George found this in the pocket of her Barnyard Buddy yesterday, Nancy said. Look familiar? Henderson gave the card a quick glance. Nah, he said. I ran out of Valentines by the time I got to the Barnyard Buddies. You did? George asked. Henderson nodded as he gave his gum a crack. If you wanted one so badly, he said, why didn't you just ask? Nancy felt her cheeks burn. Henderson was going to be a tough nut to crack. Nancy, George, take your seat, please, Miss Ramirez said. And Henderson spit out the gum. Spit out the gum right now. How many times did you hear that in class? Henderson yanked the gum out of his mouth. When Miss Ramirez turned towards the board, he quickly stuck it under his chair. I couldn't tell if it was blue, Nancy whispered. Watch this, George said. Then she turned to Henderson and said, Hey, Henderson, where did you get those dorky-looking sneakers? Henderson turned. He stuck his tongue out at George. Tongue's not blue, George whispered, so his gum probably wasn't either. Girls, take your seats, Miss Ramirez said. Yes, Miss Ramirez, Nancy said, and George sat together. They both smiled at Bess as they passed her desk, but Bess cast her eyes downward. Nancy tried not to think about Bess as she worked on her math problems, social studies, and a pop spelling quiz. But the biggest challenge that day was questioning Colette. She didn't have lunch or recess at the same time as Nancy's class. How are we going to find Colette? George asked. Nancy gave it a thought as they hung upside down on the monkey bars. Let's go to Colette's house after school, Nancy said. I think it's the one with the cow-shaped mailbox. What a surprise, George chuckled. Hey, there's Bess, Nancy said, and it looks like she's smiling at us. She's probably frowning, George said. We're upside down, remember? Oh, yeah, Nancy sighed. After school, George had permission to go straight to Nancy's house. Nancy got permission from Hannah to walk her puppy, Chocolate Chip, to Colette's house. Nancy and her friends had the same rules. They could walk up to 5 blocks away from their house as long as they walked together. Finally a picture on the monkey bars. Oh, George and Nancy, can you see? And there's Bess, all mad. I can't believe it, Nancy said after ringing the Crawfords' doorbell. Even their doorbell sounds like a cow mooing. I guess the whole family likes cows, George said. Nancy clutched Chip's leash as the door swung open. Miss Crawford had a phone pressed to one ear. Hold on. Evelyn, Miss Crawford said from the phone. She smiled at Nancy and George. Colette isn't home right now. She's at the library returning some books. Oh, Nancy said, disappointed. But I'm sure she'd like to see her new room. But I'm sure she'd like you to see her new room, Miss Crawford said cheerily. It was just decorated. Nancy and George exchanged looks. Going up to Colette's room would be a great way to look for clues. We'd like that very much, Miss Crawford, Nancy said. Can I bring my dog upstairs? sure, Miss Crawford said. She reached up and jingled her cow earrings. We love animals. Can you see? Miss Crawford continued her telephone conversation as she waved the girls into the house. Are we lucky or what? George whispered. Once upstairs, the girls found the doors leading to Colette's room. It was the only door with a cow poster on it. This must be the place, Nancy said. She clutched Chip's leash while George opened the door. As they stepped inside, their eyes popped wide open. Colette's walls were covered with black and white cow print wallpaper. There was a matching rug on the floor and a cow print bedspread on Colette's bed. Holy cow! George exclaimed. Chip tugged on the leash as she tried to inch further into the room. Stay, girl, Nancy ordered. Chip grunted softly as she sat down. Okay, George said, rubbing her hands. Let's look for clues. Nancy dropped Chip's leash as the girls searched the room. Oh my God, you see the room? Cow everywhere. Cow, 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 cow. Holy cow. The next thing George found was a shoebox next to Colette's bed. Inside were slippers with stuffed cow heads on the front. As George lifted one out of the box, it let out a loud mew. Mew. It's a cat. Moo. I don't know my animals, apparently, kids. Neat, George laughed. Put it back, George, Nancy warned. Colette could come back at any minute. The girls searched the top of Colette's desk. Among the books and loose papers, Nancy found a box of unwritten valentines. These must have been the valentines Colette gave out yesterday, Nancy said. Those cards have little cows dressed up like Cupid, George pointed out. They don't match the card I found. Nancy picked up a book report that Colette wrote by hand. Look how neat Colette's handwriting is, she said. Not like the messy handwriting in the creepy valentine. Nancy was about to put it back on the desk when, moo! The girls spun around at the sound. Nancy froze. Chocolate Chip was chewing on Colette's cow slipper. Colette. Oh no, the doggy's eating a slipper. Too many cows are messing up the lady's name. Chapter 5. We are at 7:41. Alright, Chapter 5. Bess's bad news. Chip, no, Nancy said. She ran to the puppy and yanked the slipper from her mouth. The once plush slipper was a wet, shuddered mess. My cow slippers, a voice cried out. Nancy and George whirled around. Colette was standing in the doorframe, and she looked mad. They're not totally ruined, Colette, Nancy said quickly. See? Nancy held up the shredded slipper. Instead of saying moo, it squeaked out a tiny me. Yeah, right, Colette muttered. She grabbed the torn slipper and tossed it on her bed. What are you doing in my room anyway? Your mom said it was okay to come up, George said. We were just snooping, Colette cut in. Nancy felt bad enough already, so she decided to tell Colette the whole truth. George found a mean Valentine in her barnyard buddy yesterday, Nancy explained. We wanted to find out who wrote it. You thought I wrote it? Colette asked. Why would I do a stupid thing like that? Because you wanted my cow, remember? George said. Colette shook her head. I left Barnyard Buddies right after you took your cow back, Colette said. My dad drove me to the mall to buy me the cow slippers I wanted instead. Nancy glanced sideways at George. Was Colette telling the truth? But look at my cow slippers now, Colette wailed. They're totally ruined. Nancy felt awful about what Chip did. If only she hadn't dropped that leash. Can I buy you another pair of slippers, Colette? Nancy offered. I get an allowance every week if I save. Forget it, Colette interrupted. Dogs will be dogs. That's why I like cows. The girls said a quick goodbye to Colette. Nancy clutched Chip's leash tightly as they hurried out of the Crawford house. Do you think Colette was really at the mall? Nancy asked when they were outside. We didn't see her in the store yesterday after the big chase, George said. Maybe she was buying those cow slippers with her dad. The ones Chip chewed up, Nancy sighed. When she looked down at Chip, she saw a piece of paper hanging out of Chip's mouth. "Oh no," Nancy wailed. "Don't tell me Chip chewed up Colette's homework." Nancy yanked the paper out. It didn't look like homework. "It looks like a store receipt," Nancy said, "from a place called Fancy Feet." "That's the name of the shoebox." "That's the name on the shoebox," George said. The receipt was soggy and the ink was blurry, but Nancy could still make certain things out. "The receipt has yesterday's date on it," Nancy pointed out, "and the time that Colette bought the slippers, 4:15 p.m. "The crime happened between 4 and 4:30, George said, "so Colette could have been at Barnyard Buddy's at that time." Couldn't have. Oh my goodness. Nancy remembered that Colette's Valentines were different too, and her handwriting was neat, not messy. "Colette Crawford is innocent," Nancy said. She frowned down at her dog. "And Chip is guilty of being a mischievous puppy." Sounds like my dog Daisy. "Yip yip, Jake." Chip barked, waggling her tail. Nancy carefully slipped the receipt under the Crawford's door, then made her way out of the yard with Chip and George. "Tomorrow's Saturday," Nancy said. "Let's spend the whole day working on the case." "We always spend Saturdays with Bess," George said sadly. "I wonder what she's doing tomorrow." "Probably nothing special," Nancy said with a smile. "Bess probably misses us too." Nancy and George brought Chip home. After George left, Nancy did some homework. Then she went down to the kitchen with her scrapbook and Valentine's. While Nancy sat at the table, pasting cards into her scrapbook, she told her father about her new case. Dr. Drew was a lawyer and was pretty good at helping Nancy with her cases. He was also a pretty good cook, although at times messy. "We have 2 suspects left, Daddy." Sorry, it's blurred. This came in wet. "We have 2 suspects left, Daddy," Nancy said, "but not enough clues." Mr. Drew stood at the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. He had already dripped some red sauce on his shirt sleeve and the floor. "Why don't you and George go back to the scene of the crime?" Dr. Drew asked. "That's the best place to look." Nancy smoothed a curling Valentine heart onto a scrapbook page as she thought it over. "That would be Barnyard Buddies," she thought out loud. "I guess we could look under the table Henderson sat at for a stuck-on bubble gum." "It's a gross job," Mr. Drew teased. Dr. Drew's a real person. "But somebody's got to do it." Let me show you the picture before that's the dad making the spaghetti sauce. As Nancy squeezed glue into a page in her scrapbook, Hannah came into the kitchen carrying a bag of groceries. "I ran into Miss Marvin at the supermarket," Hannah said. "She was buying a ton of heart-shaped cookies for Bess's party tomorrow." Nancy froze with the bottle in her hand. "Party?" she stammered. "Aren't you going to Bess's party, Nancy?" Mr. Drew asked. Nancy felt her heart break into a million pieces. She knew Bess was mad at George. Since when was Bess mad at her? "No, Daddy," Nancy sighed. "I wasn't even invited." Oh no. So chapter 6, we're starting at 13:58. Alright, chapter 6, called Gotcha. "Maybe it was a mistake," Mr. Drew said with a smile. "Why don't you give Bess a call and straighten it out?" "Good idea," Nancy said. She gathered her scrapbook materials and carried them into the den. Then she picked up the phone and dialed the Marvin house. After a few rings, Bess answered. "Hello?" Bess said. "Hi, Bess," Nancy blurted. "Hi, Nancy," Bess said. "What's up?" Nancy smiled. Bess didn't sound angry at all. Maybe she did forget to tell her about the party, and maybe she'd invite George too. "Hannah heard you were having a party tomorrow," Nancy said. "Are you?" "Well, kind of," Bess said slowly. "It's a Valentine's party." Are you inviting me?" Nancy asked slowly. After a moment of silence, Bess blurted, "I would if I could, but I can't, so I won't." "What does that mean?" Nancy asked. It means if I invited you, I'd have to invite George, Bess wailed, and I can't invite George after she wrote that creepy Valentine to me. Nancy was about to defend George when she heard Bess's mother calling her to dinner. My fish sticks are getting cold, Bess said. I'll save you some heart-shaped cookies from my party if there are any left. Bye, Nancy. Click. Bess had hung up, but Nancy stood staring at the phone. Not only had Bess dumped George as a friend, she had dumped her, too. Nancy frowned as she flipped open her scrapbook. The first card she saw was from Bess. It was a pink paper heart that said, Nancy, Bess, and George, BFF, best friends forever. Best friends forever, Nancy said under her breath. How did forever end so soon? So here's our plan, Nancy said the next morning. We'll go to the Barnyard Buddies and look for any clues we can find. George nodded as they parked their bikes. Oh my goodness, it is midnight, kids. It was Saturday, and the girls each had permission to pedal to River Street. Maybe we'll see Bess around, George said. She sometimes goes shopping with her parents on Saturdays. Maybe, Nancy said, but deep inside, Nancy hoped not to see Bess. The last thing she wanted was for George to find out about the party. She didn't want George to feel worse than she already did. Look, here comes Marcy, George said. Nancy looked up and smiled. Marcy and her little sister Cassidy were coming down the block. Hey guys, Marcy said. Are you psyched for Bess's party today or what? Nancy froze. Uh-oh. Bess is having a party? George gulped. Today? Duh, Marcy laughed. Bess is going to crown me Queen of the Valentines because of all the cards I got. Oh, George murmured. You're going, right? Marcy asked. I mean, I know you guys had some kind of fight, but you're still best friends, right? Nancy was about to answer when Cassidy began jumping up and down. I want to go to the party, too. I want to go to the party, too, Cassidy said. No way, Cassidy, Marcy snapped. It's for 3rd and 4th graders, and you're only in kindergarten. Cassidy's face turned as red as her sneakers. Then I'm telling, she said. I'm telling everyone that. Marcy clapped her hand over Cassidy's mouth. We better go, Marcy said. I have to get ready for the party. Cassidy screamed as they left. Marcy's hand still clapped over Cassidy's mouth. What did Cassidy mean? Nancy asked. What did she want to tell? Who cares what Cassidy was saying? George cried. Bess is having a party without me. She didn't invite me either, Nancy replied. I can't believe it, George said. We've been going to each other's parties since we were 5 years old. There's their friend clamping the hand over her little sister's mouth. I know, Nancy said. Remember the Halloween party when Bess sneezed while she was bobbing for apples? Georgie asked. I was the only one who kept playing. I know, Nancy answered. That's why we have to prove to Bess that you didn't write that creepy card. George scowled as she stuffed her hands into her jacket pockets. And who knows, Nancy said cheerily. We might even solve it in time for Bess's party today. How cool would that be? Way cool, George murmured. The two friends walked down the block into Farmer Fran's Barnyard Buddies. It was also packed with kids on Saturdays. Nancy and George went straight to the table where Henderson had sat the day they were there. 2 girls and a boy were sitting at the table, working on their stuffed animals. Mind if I look under your table? George asked. I'm looking for some chewed-up gum. The boy wrinkled his nose. Wouldn't you rather chew a fresh piece? He asked. Not explaining, George darted under the table. Nancy waited until she crawled out. No blue gum, George said, shaking her head. Just a few wads of pink, yellow, and white. Ew, one of the girls said as Nancy and George walked away. Henderson still could have been chewing blue gum that day, Nancy said. Maybe instead of sticking it under the table, he stuck it on your cow. Nancy and George were about to look for more clues when they saw Trina Vanderhoof. Trina played basketball every Saturday. She was wearing her uniform and holding a basketball under her arm. Hi, Trina, Nancy said. Weren't you just here yesterday? George asked. Trina nodded and said, My mom said that if I find a basketball uniform for my stuffed horse, she'll buy it for me for my birthday. Oh, Nancy said, but then she thought of something important. Trina, Nancy said, weren't you sitting at a table near ours yesterday? Sure, Trina said. We waved at each other a couple times, remember? Nancy nodded and said, But did you see anything weird happen at our table? Trina flipped her basketball from one hand to the other as she thought. Finally she said, Yeah, I did. What? Nancy and George asked together. Bess braided the tail of her stuffed horse, Trina said. I like Bess, but I thought that was kind of weird. Nancy shook her head. That's not what I meant, she said. When we were at the Cocoa Cafe, did anyone... George must have made an awesome cow, Trina interrupted. She twirled the basketball on her finger. What do you mean? George asked. The helper in the pig suit went over to your table and picked it up, Trina said. She looked like she was checking it out, in a good way. When? Nancy demanded. While you were at the Cocoa Cafe, Trina replied. Nancy grabbed George's arm and gave it a squeeze. The helper in the pig suit was Tanya. She's talking to her friend. Dun, dun, dun. We'll pick it up the next time. It's getting excited. Who do you think did it? Was it Henderson or this new girl, Tanya? We will find out. See you next time, kids. Be good and stay happy even in these crazy times. Love you.